Today, I have the pleasure of introducing another great friend of mine, longstanding friend of mine, whom I once again met on the competition circuit. Igor Yuzefovich is a fabulous violinist, the concertmaster of multiple orchestras, currently the concertmaster of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, recently concertmaster of Singapore and Hong Kong symphonies, a frequent guest concertmaster all around the world. But beyond that, someone who has been on all aspects of the classical industry for as long as I've known him. So please welcome Igor Yuzefovich, violinist extraordinaire.
Hi, Emil, you got the first part right. You got my name right.
Well, once I get that, the rest...
Violinist extraordinaire, but I appreciate the sentiment.
Once the name is fine, then the rest is, you know...
The rest is all downhill. That's it.
Mayonnaise and mustard, right?
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me as a guest.
I want to tell you, first of all, before we talk, I want to tell you to whom you're talking, the great unseen, so to speak.
Yeah.
So the idea behind these podcasts is to give a sense to students' parents of the realities of the classical industry, not just the grim realities, the sunny ones too. But
I was going to say, you're trying to get rid of all your students.
Everybody quit. No. No. The idea is that it's one thing to sit in the practice room and do what you think is an improvement playing wise. First, it might turn out that you are trying to improve things that no one else notices. Second, that you are leaving unimproved things that people, I hope we haven't lost Igor. Well, I'm assuming that we haven't lost Igor, and I will just finish. The sort of things that people don't know to polish need to, of course, receive their attention, and they need to be informed of what those things are. But most of all, what do you do outside the practice room? How do you prepare for an audition? How do you prepare for a competition? How do you deal with colleagues on whom your livelihood depends, and colleagues with whom you would very much like to work? What are the everyday realities? I think we have Igor back now, although I don't see him on the screen. So there he is.
I hit the mouse by mistake, and it closed off the window. Technology in today's world,
musicians are just terrible at all things tech, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you hear any of my sort of...
No, start over again. Yes, no, I got the idea overall, I think.
Yeah. So in speaking to people like that, like when I know something that when you and I know something that we don't realize that we know, it's important to point out these realities to the people who don't even know the question.
Yeah.
So I want to start with where you and I met. Do you remember?
I remember. I think it was D'Angelo competition, wasn't it?
That's right.
Was it Erie, Pennsylvania?
It was Erie, Pennsylvania. That's
Erie,
right.
Pennsylvania. I remember you being an incredible amount more prepared than I was.
But
because I didn't do very well there. But to be fair, that was my first sort of big competition that I had done. I had absolutely no idea what to expect, and I was coming from a conservatory where I felt pretty confident and comfortable with my abilities, and that was my first sort of impression of people outside of my little bubble that I was being led to believe I was safe and fine in, which is another topic that we can discuss. But the result notwithstanding, and not really is important, because as in my mind, I'm not a big fan of competitions to start with, and I don't enjoy the process. I don't like the process. I don't particularly agree with the fact that you can choose one musician over another when they're both playing on a certain level. It's like it's like going to a restaurant and saying, well, this paella is more tasty than that paella. You got 100 people, you're going to have 150 different tastes. So for me, the process was much more about the preparation, or in my case, in that particular instance, the lack of preparation. And that was perhaps the biggest lesson for me. I learned so much from my failures, if you will, that, I mean, it was like somebody turned the lights on and opened a whole new world, that I all of a sudden realized, all right, this is, we need to think on a much different global level than, what I was perhaps thinking on before.
And the thing is, your background is similar to mine. You are the child of a musician's family. You had heard all the tales of competitions and the how people prepared in the Soviet Union, and
but that's the thing, you see, growing up in the Soviet Union, and I think me being just a few short years younger than you, my knowledge of what competitions were was from watching the films of the Tchaikovsky competition, because growing up in the Soviet Union, that was the only thing that existed. Right. I mean, until a certain level where you learned about the Henry Schering competition and the Vinyavsky competitions and all the other great, the grand contests of the time. But all I knew was the international Tchaikovsky competition that happens every 4 years, and the monolith players that have won that competition during the Soviet reign. So that was on such a different level. I mean, these people were adults, and I was a child, so it was a world away. I didn't have to think about any of that. So that's why this first sort of exposure in the US was such a big eye opener, because all of a sudden I was in that age bracket. I was in that sort of pool, and
you're no longer a child, and now
I'm
you
no
have
longer a
show what you
child.
can do.
Yeah. So it was. Yeah.
But I can tell you that I grew up not with films, but with firsthand accounts from my mother, and it helped not at all, because in spite of
we
her,
never listened to our parents.
Well, of course not.
Our parents are not there for us to listen to. They're there for us to tell. They're there to tell us 20 years later, "I told you so." And how many times do we sit there and say, "Oh, if only I listened. If only I knew."
But even if you listen, even if even if the words sink in and you think you know what you're doing, the real experience I found going to the same contest that my mother did, it's a totally different world.
Absolutely.
What do you think was the first biggest lesson in terms of preparation, in terms of like what you thought good was and what you learned good actually was?
That's a tough question, because I don't think there was a particular moment. I mean, that competition, for example, was a big sort of first light bulb that went off. I think it's an evolving thing, because as we grow up, as we get older, we learn to practice differently. We learn to understand that what we think is good might be good, but it doesn't need to be necessarily better. It just needs to be different. We don't.
Or even did you find that like you'd be focused, you'd be hell bent on this one aspect that you only later learn goes completely unremarked, unnoticed by the judges?
Or in addition to that, you keep banging your head against the wall trying to get one passage, and you're working on this one shift, when in reality it has more to do with what part of the bow you're in, and or something entirely. You have to learn to change your approach to the issue, to the problem. And that's really the process that I've enjoyed learning, and that I enjoy, and I'm sure you do as well, passing on to our students. Because when you see that light bulb moment in their heads, and they realize that, I don't have to stand here for 5 hours and practice this one shift over and over and over and not get any result. I can actually just, put the problem on its head and
think laterally, think outside the box, learning to hearing you play, hearing other people that I met on the circuit play, also learning that this thing that I thought could only be played really this one way, I never considered playing it this way. It's competitions get a lot of bad mouthing because of the high stress, because like you said, it is like a paella, 100 different diners, 150 different ideas. But one thing that I think you would probably agree with me, one thing that they did for me, I think they probably did for you, introducing you to a much wider world of players and a much wider world of possibilities, interpretative possibilities.
Absolutely. And if you listen, because I know a lot of people who go into competitions and they don't want to talk to anybody. It's the same with auditions. They don't want to talk to anybody. They're in their zone. They, you know, God forbid you say hello to them, and you've just thrown them off their preparation rocker. But those who come in and they're confident with what they're doing, but then they sit and they listen to other people. You know, I mean, that was my most enjoyable part, sitting there and listening to you in the second and third and the final rounds. And I enjoyed hearing all these different conceptualizations of what I had been working on or what I had heard before. And it's very different from hearing a record, as we all know.
Oh, of course.
It's so different from even going to a concert and hearing somebody perform the same piece a million times.
Because you and they are two different animals, right? In the concert hall, you are the listener and they are the performer. And of course, they are completely different from you. But in the competition, right. Yeah. But in the competition, you're both contestants. Right. Why can't I steal your idea of fingerings for that variation in the 24th Caprice? Why can't I steal that person's vibrato for Mozart?
Yeah, but I think you also, in a competition setting, if you're listening completely differently than if you're sitting there in a concert, skimming through the program, looking at the orchestra's faces. Oh, that guy's asleep, or that guy's really not enjoying it, or that's really nice. It's an entirely different mindset.
What would you like people to know about how to listen like that before they even go in?
To not, well, I'm going to probably step into a puddle of mud if I say this, but I don't want people to treat music as entertainment. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
Because yes, it's entertaining us. But this is what gets me. I ask people, or people say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I play violin, classical music." Say, "Oh yeah, I listen to classical music. It helps me unwind.
It's so relaxing."
It's so relaxing. And I say, "Do you know what? I don't listen to classical music to relax, because that's the last feeling that I have when I'm listening to something. I can't tune out. I can't zone out. I sit in the car and I'm listening because I'm forced to listen critically. I'm forced to." If I know the piece, I'm forced to listen to what they do differently, or what they do the same, or how they phrase something. If it's pop music, rap music, techno, chill music, whatever. And, we have this conversation with my wife, who's a singer, nonstop. I don't know the first lyric to any song because I don't listen to that. I don't listen to that.
It's acoustic. It's acoustic wallpaper.
Yeah, it's acoustic to me. It's kind of noise in the background that helps me unwind and helps me relax. And so if I talk to a rocker and I tell him that, they're going to look at me the same way that I look at somebody who sells classical music for them to relax.
Absolutely. So when you're listening as a professional, would you say that it's almost impossible to learn to listen that way for somebody who's not practicing, 3 hours, 6 hours, 9 hours a day?
No, it's not. They don't need to listen that way. I don't think an average or a symphony concert goer needs to listen to an orchestra the same way that a player who's sitting next to them. Just like if a chef went into a restaurant, they're going to taste things totally differently than if you and I went in with our, elaborate palates and our worldly knowledge of cuisine and wine.
No, At most, I'll say, that was really fantastic. But if you ask me why, I'll say
because I liked it.
Because I liked it, right?
Because I liked it, and at the end of the day, that is the goal. We want to make music that people like, that they get an emotional response from. But I think people need to, instead of thinking, "Oh, I need to rise to this exquisite and this exotic and very elite level of appreciation," they need to be able to find a way to unlock their emotions when they listen to music. No one needs to analyze a Brahms symphony, or a Mahler symphony when they're listening to it. You don't need to do that. Just find how that makes you feel, find that emotional connection, and let the music take you on a journey. And at the end of the day, you're going to feel tired or rejuvenated or exhilarated or whatever, because you've just gone through a 2-hour process.
Well, that there you are also touching on something else. Where else in everyday life, in everyday 21st century life, is there anything that commands your undivided 2-hour long attention? Even
Well,
even the most compelling, movie, TV show, whatever, you're going to find your mind wander,
yeah, yeah.
right?
You're wondering, a great movie that you sit through and you find yourself sitting on the edge of your seat. And this has been talked about a million times, but you take that movie, you take the soundtrack out, and that's gone. I mean, dare I say that a large portion of the movie industry's success is not so much in the incredible footage that we're able to get and the graphics and the action scenes and everything. It's the soundtrack.
Right.
That's
Actually,
why people listen to soundtracks without watching the movie. Nobody watches a movie without listening to the soundtrack. Right?
Yes. People do go to an orchestra concert to hear the Harry Potter soundtrack.
People buy soundtracks. They buy the discs. They download the tunes, and they think, that's that awesome drive. I was just listening to a new soundtrack that I helped record. We did this recording session for The Invisible Man here in London, and I sort of almost forgotten about it because this was back in the last era of our life, the pre-coronavirus,
pre-COVID,
pre-COVID, which it's like a different lifetime now. But I just found this on YouTube. I found the link to all the entire soundtrack. It's fantastic music. It's really, really brilliantly done, very well orchestrated, well recorded, well played, and it's gripping because you can instantly see the movie. I mean, in
a way you might not even see it in the theater. You've got the movie here, right?
You got the movie here, and your imagination is creating the visuals to what you're hearing. It's fascinating. And then, of course, when you watch the movie, it's going to be a double whammy.
I would recommend to anybody watching. There was a documentary I recently saw about the making of Star Wars, and they have fragments of the making of. So here is just the actors running towards the camera with the equivalent of the 1970s equivalent of the green screen behind them or whatever. And then they had at one point a scene that had everything in it, all the special effects, the laser beams, the whatever, but no soundtrack.
Yeah.
And it is not a movie. It's a high school
silly.
play.
It's silly.
Yeah.
That's
the
power of
respect. The respect I've always had, in varying, greater or lesser degrees for John Williams. It skyrocketed. I did not realize until I saw that. Until you feel the absence of it, you don't realize the importance of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. The power of music is incredible. And
I think here's where the parents and the students, have a takeaway from this. I think that if you can learn to listen, not just in the concert hall, not just in recordings, not just in the studio recital, if you can just learn to listen, with full attention, you will find about the performers and about the music things that you never noticed on 50, 100, however many different previous hearings. You will open a world for yourself, but that's a skill. Learning to listen is a skill. That doesn't mean that you need to be a master of that skill in order to enjoy things, but the more masterful you become, the more enjoyment there is to be had.
Yeah.
So in terms of listening, let me segue into the competitive listening, especially, when you transition from being the competitor to being the judge. Tell me a little bit about the kind of listening you do when you are listening to orchestra auditions versus what you thought people were listening to when you were auditioning.
Yeah. Listening to anything in that scene, in that setting, whether it's auditions or competitions, first thing I'll tell you, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's exhausting because you feel this responsibility to really honestly listen to somebody. And you have to be honest, your mind does wander at times and you find yourself thinking, oh, wait a minute, what excerpt are they playing right now? To that, I'll say your job as a competitor or as a person playing the audition is to make sure that doesn't happen. is to make sure that your playing is so interesting. It's not perfect. The perfection is not what we're going for ever. It's interesting that it grabs people's attention who've been sitting there for 6 hours or 2 days or 4 days. You know, in the US, 3-4 days of auditions, you know, starting with hundreds and hundreds of players. So anyway, how do we listen to? I think everybody's a little bit different on the panel, and that's the beauty of having a panel. You have very different perspectives. It's very often that we don't agree at all. I mean, I've had cases virtually in every orchestra that I've worked in where I've sat on the panel where 2 or 3 players will have completely opposite reactions or ideas or thoughts about what they just heard. But what I try to listen to, what I like to hear is somebody who plays on a certain level. I mean, you have to be of a certain level.
Yeah.
But let's assume that's the given. You have to, for an audition for an orchestra, you get to play a short excerpt. Sometimes it's 15 seconds. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it's 30 seconds, because you have a chance to actually play something rather than, you know, make 3 squeaks and say, how was that? You know?
Right.
So, but even if you have 3 squeaks, make those squeaks, first of all, sound as if you're trying to say something. You know, don't play them like an exercise. I mean, take Mendelssohn, Midsummer Night's Dream.
I was about to ask.
You know, I mean, let's take the most standard stuff. Mendelssohn. I mean, okay, we all hear the perfect rendition. We all hear the it's perfectly in tune. Everything's correct, but it is dull. It's boring. There's no life to the notes. The chances that you have on the eighth notes to vibrate a little bit, to add a little sparkle, because A, you're playing by yourself, so you have a chance to be heard. B, you're trying to bring something to that excerpt that's in addition to the wonderful music that it is already. And C, you're trying to stand out from a crowd of 175 other players who've just come in and played it exactly the same way.
Well, let me stop you for a second there. Of that 175, would you say that most of them, all of them, few of them have the basics? For me, what I've always told students is there's 3 non-negotiables: sound and intonation and rhythm, and to some degree sound, a sound that you can hear that will blend. But you know, you can debate whether you're talking about style or sound quality, but you cannot debate rhythm and intonation.
Of course.
Of that 175, what proportion would you say can be faulted sufficiently for either of those basics that you can discard immediately?
It's tough to say. It depends. It depends from time to time, honestly. We've had auditions where we've heard, let's say, 100 people, and we're kind of just scratching our head thinking, oh my God, what does this world come to? There's 85 of those people just either were not prepared or just can't play their instrument or just having a bad day or you name it.
Well, clueless. They didn't know what they were getting into.
Or or just you are really stepping into something that's far above their pay grade, if you will.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we've had auditions where we're scratching our heads thinking, there's
how can we choose
5 players who are all fantastic. Like, how are we going to say that this person is better than that person? So, you know, this is where it becomes really about taste and about the much deeper meanings of playing the instrument. What are they trying to say with that excerpt? First of all, I want people to figure out why that excerpt is on the list. You know, let's look at a list. You've got 10, 12 excerpts on average, maybe less sometimes.
You have your Daphnis and Chloe, you have your Midsummer Night's Dream, you have a Beethoven symphony, you have your Strauss.
Right.
Why?
You've got Don Juan usually, and you've got then
a Brahms symphony at least.
Symphony. Right. So, you know, if you are the one taking the audition, your first question after looking at the list shouldn't be, oh, do I have all this music? It should be, why is that excerpt on the list? What are they looking for? What is it that I can show in this 2.5 lines that I'm playing, which to me doesn't seem that interesting or doesn't seem that important? Why are they asking 100 people to play this particular thing? And that's what we're listening for, and sound, absolutely. Intonation, rhythm, okay, that's, it's like filling up a car and saying it's got four wheels and a gas pedal and a brake pedal. It's not a car until it has that. So, I mean, then we get into the depths of the style of, does this person know what this piece is about? You'd be surprised how many people come to an audition in a major orchestra having never played the symphony that this excerpt is from, and that's very telling. It's one thing. It's one thing.
Immediately from listening to them that they've never actually played it.
They've never played it. They've never played it. They might have heard the excerpt. They might. And I've asked students. This is one of my first questions that I ask. Somebody comes to play audition excerpts for me, and I don't care if they're 15 or 55. I'll say, "Have you played this piece in an orchestra?" Because it's very telling. If you're playing something, let's take Midsummer Night's Dream. The way it's written, if you're playing it, I would learn it, and I would just play it. I could never get away with playing it like that in an orchestra. It has to be ethereal. It has to be so incredibly light, bouncy, and in a certain way, you have to know how much to drop down, how much more sound to give, where to wait just a smidgen, because the oboe comes in there with you, or the clarinet has something there, or the timpani has something there,
which you're imagining as you're playing it.
Yeah. And if you know that the basses are playing a pizzicato, you've got to give them a split second of time to make that sound. So you can't just barge in on that one downbeat or something. I mean, there's too many examples really to list unless you're looking at specific excerpts. But it becomes very evident, I think, to a committee when somebody's playing something for the first time. B, let's take a Strauss example. And Don Juan. Don Juan is virtually in every single audition that I've ever taken, I've had to play Don Juan. It's a story. It's one page, right? It's probably the longest excerpt that you're going to get to play.
Certainly,
unless you're doing a solo, you're doing solos from Heldenleben or something. It's a whole page. So finally, you have a chance to lay into it, get into this thing, and you're no longer afraid of making a mistake in the Schumann scherzo or the three lines from Prokofiev Classical Symphony. You've got one chance to nail that high note, and otherwise the world just explodes. But you've got a chance to play. And so many people come in and play it as if it's, a Rode etude. But every measure in that piece has to sound differently. Every line has to say something because it references something that's part of the story. And when we hear somebody coming in and playing it as if they're telling a story, our ears perk up and we say, this is a person I want in my section because they're going to contribute something. They're going to contribute musically. They're going to, and again, we're not talking about the technical aspect. That's a black or white for the most part.
Right.
It's either there or it's not. But this person is going to contribute something to the section. They're going to inspire people around them, which is so important, because if we're playing musically, our innate abilities make us play musically when someone next to us is doing the same thing.
You're reacting.
We're reacting. We're such subconscious animals that, and that's why we react to a conductor's gesture and the way that they make that gesture so much more than when they make that gesture. Because a monkey can conduct like this, you can put a robot up there, but if they go like this, then we're going to play like that unless we specifically think this piece doesn't go like this, But when we see that, we play that way. It's built in, it's subconscious. We have to fight it to do it differently.
Well, you see somebody delivering a downbeat that is wavy, you're going to come in wavy.
Yeah. If you're going to have to boom, you play it like that. You don't come in crashing with a fortissimo. It's kind of basic when you think about it, but all of these aspects come into play when we're thinking about auditioning. How do I want to play excerpt from a Mozart symphony from the slow movement? That simple phrase, one octave. That's all it is. But within that octave, there's so much life and there's so much energy. And there's, if you come in playing at mezzo piano, I'm sorry, you're not going to get the job in my group. But if you come in and there's energy in the pianissimo, and there's this like this the texture, like you're rubbing your fingers on sand. It's dry, and you've got this core. That's interesting.
And I've said this to more students than I care to remember. There is no point in having a conversation past intonation, past rhythm. You don't have that, like you said. It's the four wheels and the gas pedal. But it's important that you understand that when you're playing the audition, and God forbid an out of tune note has slipped by, your life has not ended.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the end of the world. And again, I say perfection is not what we're going for, because if you're so focused on perfection, 99% of the time you're missing something.
I don't know if you remember.
The beauty is at times in the imperfection. I mean, yeah, of course, again, there's a
level of imperfection. I don't know if you remember, but in our D'Angelo, I seem to remember that there was one person who was playing the A minor fugue by Bach. And somewhere, I still don't know how this person did it. I don't even remember if it was male or female. Somehow they played like one wrong chord and suddenly found themselves playing the G minor fugue.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember if I heard it, but I remember. I think we might have talked about it before.
Yeah.
I know there was I don't know if this was a rumor or this was a legend, but somebody asked Oistrakh why he didn't play Chaconne very often. He didn't perform it very often. And again, this might be forgive me if this is a false rumor, but he was playing it somewhere, and he's after the concert, he's backstage and tons of people are coming up, and Mr. Royce, are you okay? Is everything all right? Yeah. David Feathers, you okay? Are you feeling all right? Yeah, great, everything's fine. One after another, people are asking him if he's okay. And then finally, somebody he knows and trusts very well came up to him and said, Dodik, are you okay? He says, what's going on? Why is everyone asking? Everybody asking me if I'm okay. It's like, you skipped the whole middle section. It's hard to believe this is a true story, but I've seen that happen with students. I've seen that happen in like class performances or so. There are certain things. Look, I'll admit, I'll own up to this. At one time, somewhere in a contest, I won't say where or when or where, I was playing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. Do you know where this story is going?
Actually,
all of a sudden, the first movement was about a good 13 minutes shorter than it should have been.
Oh, crap. You skipped from exposition to recap.
I sure did.
And I know exactly where. I know the passage where.
Exactly.
One finger off.
One finger. It's the one moment your mind goes to the light that's hanging there. And, because I didn't practice properly, because I didn't practice musically, because I was practicing it over and over and over. And I probably practiced this passage, and then I went and practiced that passage, and my fingers just, the train operator forgot to switch the tracks, and the train just went.
It's funny. I use the same analogy of train tracks. I actually call them train tracks. The place in the piece where if you throw the switch and this one tiny piece of iron points the wrong way, instead of ending up in New York, you end up in Albuquerque.
Yeah. Well, I was halfway to Albuquerque before I finally had the conscience to stop. Well, it got a few measures into it. Jill Lawson, a fantastic pianist who was playing for me, and God bless her soul, she tried her darnest to make it work and go with me. But I mean, there was just we both.
In fact, I just saw the same thing in a competition last year, youth competition, where a wonderful player playing Brahms managed to skip from exposition to recap, and his pianist, who you know and who I know, I can mention her name because she's so wonderful, Hui Chan, skipped with him. She jumped ahead straight into the recap and then seamlessly brought him right back to the exposition.
That's a talent.
I said, if they don't give you a medal, there's an injustice. Yeah, those kind of unrecoverable things, I think they just become, the war stories that you look back on and laugh afterwards.
Yeah, of course.
In fact, at the D'Angelo where we met, I don't know if you remember this about my Mendelssohn, but I had exactly that, where I played the right fingerings, the right finger pattern on the wrong string because I was playing the coda instead of playing the pre-cadenza thing.
Right.
Yeah.
The Mendelssohn is another challenging one because there's so many times where you can just alter it a little bit and you're gone. You're gone. I don't even want to say it. I don't want to put it in anybody's head. I don't want anybody to think about it. It's going to be perfect. Whoever is listening, if anybody's playing Mendelssohn, don't worry about it.
If you as the contestant, as the auditioner, if you have a moment like that, okay, that goes without saying. But I have also seen a look of horror across people's faces, probably my own, when this very exposed moment goes intonationally wrong, where rhythmically this thing is somehow unclear. You're not together with the orchestra or with the pianist or whatever. And in an audition situation, a friend of mine whom I met, again, at a competition, but who's a member of the Detroit Symphony, made the analogy that auditioning versus competing is like running a sprint versus running a marathon. That in a competition of 3 rounds, you might be able to recover. In an audition of 30 seconds, that may be it. You may have just tripped, out of starting gate and you don't have time to recover in a 100-meter sprint. But that said, what you've said earlier about how the committee is listening, let them make the decision about whether or not you've just committed an unrecoverable sin. Why don't you, stay in character with Mendelssohn, with Brahms, with Strauss? This is the suggestion that I say as a experienced auditioner, that I'm hoping you will back up as a hyper-experienced auditioner, that what you think is the end of the world may go unremarked by the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many things that we hear when we play under our ear, and we hear things much more critically than a person standing 6 feet away will hear. Countless times I've walked off of stage thinking, oh, that was just the worst performance. It was so out of tune. I missed that passage. I screwed up over here. And I'll go and I'll listen to the recording. And I think, wait a minute, did they edit this?
Yeah.
Actually,
it's not that bad.
It's not that bad. Everything else is horrible that I thought was great. But this one passage that I was, stressing my whole life about, it's actually fine. So, no, that's actually, it's interesting. That leads us to another topic, because you have to learn to listen yourself from the other corner.
There.
As my teacher used to say, you have to listen to yourself from that corner. All my teachers actually used to say that.
Well, your teachers were Russian primarily.
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, exactly.
To do that, do you use extra equipment? I mean, do you record yourself? Do you just... is it a mental thing or is it a technological thing?
It's both. I mean, yes, of course, now with the technology, it's so easy to do. You take a mic, you put a phone up there in the corner of the room, and you listen to yourself. That's very important. It's one of the biggest tools you can have, is to record yourself playing and then listen critically to yourself. But you have to listen to yourself while you're playing. And that's a much harder skill to master, because instead of all the things that you think about, what's coming up, what's happening, sort of have to happen in the subconscious. You have to be hyper aware of what's coming out of the instrument in order to be able to adjust it. It's kind of like driving. When we learn to drive, we get behind the wheel and we think, okay, gas, brakes, wheel, 10 seconds, check the mirror, gas, brake, wheel, 10 seconds, check the mirror. We're so hyper aware of what we need to do. We might not even notice that truck that's coming at us, or the car from the side that's going to be crossing our path. That comes with experience. And that's why, young drivers are so vulnerable to accidents, because they're so focused on just what's in front of them right here. That's how we are when we're practicing often. We're focused on just what do we need to do? Okay, I need to shift, I need to move my arm up, I need to change my thumb position. We're thinking about all that stuff. We don't even hear what's coming out of the instrument. And that's the part that when we drive now, we don't think about, these things. We're scanning the horizon, thinking, that kid
that might be
in that car 30, yards away, he's looking at his phone. He's not looking at my car. I'm going to slow down now so that he passes in front of me. Things like that, because we can't just focus on what we need to do.
Well, no, the feedback, the real-time feedback, what the late great Fleischer said, about the three people inside your head.
Right.
Looking ahead to see that there's that obstacle coming up, or there's that thing that you really enjoy, by contrast. Being present in the moment, you happen to be veering off the road, to stay with that analogy, and also being aware of what's just happened.
Yeah.
Just there, you fishtailed, you'd better slow down. You're not getting good traction. There where you had an attack at the upper, quarter of the bow. It's because your bow is going behind your back. Maybe you need to watch where the contact point is.
Right. Adjust. And also, what else can you do in order to carry this phrase longer, in order to make this arc that you've been trying to come up with, or to think of? And then in the performance, what's the orchestra doing? Yeah. I mean, we're all talking about, us individually, but let's say you're standing in front of the orchestra, and that's an entirely different animal. You can't just...
I can tell you from my experience, I auditioned one time in my life for concertmaster. I won't mention which orchestra. It was a major symphony orchestra. And the program was, this is like in the early days, I would say, of YouTube being, the go-to. But the program was stuff that not only I had not played before, I'm sure most musicians hadn't played before. It was a sort of, jazz classical crossover. And, yes, Gershwin was on the program, but nothing that you'd ever played of Gershwin, and to my, embarrassment now, I realized that I didn't do any of the legwork in tracking down these pieces. Okay, I couldn't find the time to play them in an orchestra because orchestras didn't play them, but at least to listen to them, at least to know how the pieces fit together. So, sitting there, in the concertmaster chair, all the skill that I have as a player was absolutely useless. I had a car with a decent engine. I had no map and I had no steering wheel.
And as my teacher used to say, you, my friend, were going in the opposite direction.
I asked
everybody on the way.
I asked this teacher that we're both talking about, that we won't mention by name right now, whether this anecdote is true. And he said, it sounds kind of like me. I often speak in metaphors. And I was thinking, oh, sir, but this isn't just a metaphor. Would you care to tell the full tale, Igor?
Well, I think we can freely mention the fantastic teacher that we both know very well. Viktor Danchenko was apparently teaching somebody. Danchenko came from Oistrak's class. Oistrak's class was one of these always open classes to everybody. If I was having a lesson, the entire studio was welcome to come in and sit in, and come and go as you please. Basically, because oftentimes as students, we're playing the same piece, or sharing ideas. And what better way to learn something than to go and see somebody else having a lesson on the piece that you're working on? You learn so much more than just what you have a chance to do in 45 minutes or an hour. So anyway, it was one of these open classes, and somebody was playing Tchaikovsky concerto, and apparently it wasn't going very well, and for this student. And the legend again, this is full of legends. The legend has it that Mr. Danchenko stopped her, and in his wonderfully, beautifully rich Russian accent, which I can't do. I'm so ashamed that I can't do a Russian accent. Which is he basically started telling her the story about a 3-lane highway. And he said, in the left lane, you have a sports car, and it's fantastic. It knows exactly, professional driver, it knows exactly where it's going. In the middle lane, you have a nice family sedan with a family, and they have a triptych from AAA, and they know where to stop to sightsee, and they have a general idea of where to go. And in the right lane, you have a crappy truck with a dummy truck driver, and it just keeps breaking down every 5 kilometers, and it's just It's just useless. And so he says, well, now, my dear, which lane do you think you're in with your playing? And I think by the time that this question was posed, one by one, every member of that class had quietly exited the door. Just not to be.
This is not going to end well.
This bomb is going to drop at some moment. Nobody wanted to be a part of it, and whoever was left to recount this story, heard the following in response. She said, "Well, Mr. Danchenko, of course, like everybody, I want to be in the left lane. I want to be the sports car. I guess I'm still in the middle. I still have a lot of work to do." And Mr. Danchenko looked at her and he said, "My dear, you are going in the opposite direction, crashing into everybody." And we all of his students know this story. And you can ask anybody from Curtis to Peabody. We all know this story, and we love him even more for that. Because the amount of intellect that you need to come up with something like that on the fly, first of all, while listening to somebody teaching. And at the same time, you can say, well, that's mean. Sorry, get over it. It's mean, but it serves a point. He's not being rude. He's not being anything other than telling you that your concept is completely the wrong way. Your approach.
You think this is supposed to be fast. It is in fact slow. You think this is supposed to be loud. It's in fact soft. Basic things like that.
It's a basic thing, and everyone has their own individual. I don't know, individual ways that they think a teacher should be, or their ways that they relate to a teacher or something. For me, I was often absolutely terrified of having a lesson with Danchenko, because I knew that, first of all, I knew the amount of knowledge that he had, and I was always basically bringing something and saying, or trying to say with my playing, that, well, I know what I'm doing, and I knew all the time that he could so easily, just put me back down to size. That I think I was more terrified of disappointing him in lessons, and then really, he would never do anything. He might say something that you think is mean, but well, it's a tough world we're living in. You have to kind of grow thick skin a little bit. But he was incredibly caring of all of his students. He still is.
Yeah, it's not about preserving your the delicacy of your feelings, and it's not about gratuitously tromping on them. It's about I found the level of vehemence that a teacher expresses. This isn't quite right versus this is just backwards. That level of vehemence is essential. Yeah. Sometimes you do say, I'm sorry, but could you do a little, and you try to soft pedal it, only to find that you, let's say, are listening to an auditionee for an orchestra, and you say, could you try to play this a little bit faster? And they take it the same tempo. Or you say, could you try playing this non-vibrato? And nothing changes. At some point you have to say something extreme to get the person's attention. You don't have that option as an audition leader, but you certainly have that responsibility as a teacher.
Yeah, and
to get through.
I think we've all played with, if you take the orchestral example, for example, we have a certain amount of time to convey the composer's feelings, the meanings, and also the interpretation that the conductor wants to do. There's no time for, sugarcoating things always. Yes, you have to be diplomatic. Yes, you have to be respectful. Of course, you've got, as a conductor, you've got 100 players in front of you who, A, have played this piece 100 or 1,000 times between them all. B, probably have played it with better conductors than you are. And C, probably could conduct it as well. So, yes, there's a lot you have to respect. But most of the time, things are said, things are pretty cut and dry. We all know that there's nothing personal, and oftentimes conductors are much more emotional than others. Some are much more emotional than others, and some people get upset and feelings get hurt, and then 2.5 hours later you get over it and you go on with your life. But
Have you found that, even today in the 21st century, as opposed to, the heyday of the prima donna conductor of the 20th century? Have you
yeah, of
found
course
that
it's
conductors
different.
can?
We don't have the Toscaninis of the era. I haven't experienced anybody breaking their batons in rehearsals over and over and over and over, as you can
Or
hear.
calling the musicians pigs?
Yeah. Well, thanks to the unions, that really wouldn't fly very, very far and very long. That being said, there are conductors who push the boundary, and there are performers who push the boundary. I've played with a number of soloists who I would choose never to ever work with again. And I've played under conductors who, if it was up to me, I would prefer to never see on a podium again either. Not because of their musical taste, but simply because of their attitude.
Yeah.
Because their attitude, in my opinion, gets in the way of what they're actually trying to do. And what they're trying to do is actually quite good. They have good, really, really interesting musical ideas, but they just don't know how to communicate with a group of people in a respectful and crisp and effective manner. So anyway, we're getting off the tangent.
Well, that's not entirely off tangent, because I did want to also ask you, beyond the whole audition trial by fire, once somebody is playing in an orchestra, once they are in that sort of trial period where their prospective colleagues for decades to come are sort of trying it out, how is this going to work? What is it that you wish people knew about that whole dynamic? Getting along with the people that you've just won a chance to play with.
It's a process. It's a family. It's every orchestra is different. Every family is different. Every relationship is different within the family. I've had the privilege of working in some wonderful orchestras and making, fantastic lifelong friends in each one of them. There are people that you grow much closer with, and some people that you are very friendly and you say hello, but you don't really ever hang out with. It's a very dynamic thing. I would say anytime you join a new group, a new band, a new orchestra section, your first job really needs to be to learn about who you're working with. And, whatever your first impressions might be, oftentimes you'll find they might be wrong, as many first impressions often are.
Yeah, you think this person's standoffish, they're shy, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and they could be thinking the same thing about you, and that would be, their reaction to you would be to come off standoffish. But in reality, you realize that once you take the time to get to know them, to find out about them, they're actually incredibly interesting, incredibly well read, or they have a wealth of talents that you wouldn't even think of. But it's also not forgetting who you are and why you were invited or chosen for that position, because well, I think it's fair to say in my position, in the leadership position, there are certain things that we have to do. We have to lead, and we have to sometimes change certain behaviors or certain attitudes or certain things that the orchestra or the section is already kind of used to.
They have their own
trend,
tradition
to do something. Much like a music director who comes into an orchestra as a guest conductor, they've got 1 week to work with the orchestra, so it's not really the place to change traditions. A music director can, and often does, adapt or change or add to the ongoing tradition. Nobody wants to come into the Philadelphia Orchestra and change the way they sound. Then, they wouldn't be Philadelphia Orchestra or Chicago or Boston. But if you can mold that into something new or add something to that, and oftentimes it means, maybe going against the grain a little bit, because we're all animals of or creatures of comfort. We know what we like, and we don't like change very much. So it's
But
important
would you say that in the orchestras that you've been in, that as soon as you come in, do you feel that already there, because it's a leadership position, that already there's an element that has changed? Already things are kind of in a state of flux. Is that all it takes?
It depends. It depends. I mean, if we look at, if I was sitting in the section, and this is going back to our sort of how aware we are subconsciously of what's happening, and there's a leader in front of me, a concertmaster in front of me, depending on who that is, I'm going to play differently. Depending on who I'm sitting next to, I'm going to somehow sound different, play differently, because if I have an incredibly still and kind of stone person sitting next to me, I'm going to feel very uncomfortable. And that's going to affect my playing. If I have somebody next to me who's just gesticulating wildly with their instrument, I'm going to sit there and think, how in the world is their instrument not flying out of their hands yet? I'm going to play differently. Subconsciously, it's going to change the way I play. So that's part of my job as a leader, to affect change and to inspire a certain sound or a way of playing in the section behind me, in the way that I move, in the way that I sit, in the way that I play, in the way that I conduct myself, and all those things. I wouldn't say there's an instantly a sense of flux when somebody new comes in, because if it's something that gels, if it's something that works, then it's not going to create chaos. It's just going to actually move things along in a better way. That's why we have trials. That's why we have trial periods for players, because just based on the audition, yes, they're good enough to play in the orchestra. Yes, they bring something to the group, but are they going to gel with the group, or are they going to make or create issues within the group?
Right.
We don't have time for issues in the orchestra.
Whether that's issues of playing, or issues, I suppose, of personality, or
either. Either. I mean, you take the BBC Symphony, for example. We've got 2, sometimes 3 completely different programs per week. Most of it is less played, lesser known, a lot of contemporary stuff, a lot of new world premieres, tons of commissions that we do. I mean, that's the bread and butter of the BBC Symphony. We don't play the Tchaikovsky symphonies, the Brahms symphonies, the Mozart symphonies over and over and over, like many symphony orchestras in the States, for example, would. That's their traditional sort of stuff. There's a Brahms cycle every year, there's a Beethoven cycle every 10 years or so. So yes, we do that stuff, they do the core rep, but the majority of our stuff is incredibly intense as far as our attention. We don't have time to deal with personal issues within members, and 2 years in,
or on adaptability in terms of playing.
And 2 years in, I'm still amazed at how well everybody gels with everybody, and that's part of the process of finding not just the right player, but the right person. And that element goes in any orchestra. It's not unique to us. It was the same with Baltimore Symphony. It's the same with Singapore Symphony. It's the same with Hong Kong Phil.
I seem to remember that when you went to Singapore, there was a period where you were there, but it was not yet a commitment on your part or on their part. It was let's see how this will work. Period.
Right, and that's very important, because you have to remember, it's a two-way street. It's not just are they going to like me? It also has to be, am I going to like working with this orchestra? Am I going to be able to bring something to this group? Am I going to be able to change anything if something needs to be changed, or developed, or brought something new that's brought to the table? So it's like dating. I mean, you don't marry somebody on your first date, and if you do, most of the time it doesn't work out. You have to get to know each other, and you have to get to know the personalities and figure out what things work, what things don't. Can the things that don't work, can they be are
they subject to improvement, or is this written stone?
Yeah, exactly. And oftentimes we find that we've given the trial period to a great player, there's no question to their ability, but something doesn't work. Something doesn't gel with the section. Either it's personality or just this something. There's something you can't put a description to it, but it just doesn't work. And sadly, that person doesn't get the job in the end.
What's the longest period, trial period that you've ever seen end up without a contract?
It's the UK. I think in the United Kingdom, the trial periods can go on for years. This is something that I know there's a lot of frustration about it, because I don't know why. I haven't quite figured out why we can't just say here's a one season. That's standard in the US. Trial period, probation period, one season. Sometimes it's an X amount of weeks with the music director. Sometimes it's 6 months, whatever it is. Let's set it in stone. That person is there every day. We're going to know after 6 months, we're going to know who that person is and what they bring to the table.
Yeah.
But for some reason, and there might be a very good explanation, I just don't know what it is. In the UK, I've had friends whose trials lasted 4, 5, 6 years.
Wow.
And and it's one of those things. They come in every week and it's almost a joke. Like I'm still on trial. I feel like I work here.
Do they get other jobs as well then?
Yeah, well, they have to, because they're essentially a freelancer who are running around 3 or 4 different trials, and on one hand it's great because they have a lot of work out of this because they're constantly being brought in. But at the same time, I think we all would like to have some stability in our lives and some knowledge that we have a contract, we have a job, we can just exhale a little bit and relax.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions that are popping up, and I wonder if maybe we should address them. I'm your mind reader. I'll let you.
Well,
you're the moderator. You take care of it.
The question popped up on my screen, and now my lack of technological know-how means
all right.
There.
So it's from Rory.
What are your thoughts about self-criticism, and when perfectionism becomes a barrier to expression, how does one practice and achieve both?
Oh, that's a simple question. Boy, self-criticism is very important, but you have to learn where to draw the line. You cannot be a perfectionism. You can't be a perfectionist to the point where that inhibits your ability to improve. So you have to know what this actually goes back to our talking about listening to each other from the corner of the room, using your third ear. You have to kind of you have to dive a little bit deeper. What kind of perfection are you looking for? Is it technical perfection? Okay, you can't really argue with that. It's either in tune or it's not in tune. Is it a bowing technique that you're trying to get the perfect uppo staccato? All right, but uppo staccato, none of us are Heifetz. There are some amazing bowing arms that I've seen and heard. Is that always the most important element of what you're playing? Can that be worked around? Let's say you're not born with that gift. I'm not born with an uppo staccato. I can't do it to save my life, but I can find ways around it, and I can still get the point of the piece across without the incredible motion. I mean, don't even ask me to down bow staccato unless it says solo and pianissimo and oh no.
But it's a down bow staccato.
Down bow staccato, yeah.
There's actually a specific instance that happened to me in the competition in Monte Carlo, where I had to play in the same round. I had to play Paganini Le Streghe, and I had to play Introduction and Rondo. And afterwards, I didn't make it to the final round, but Spivakov was talking to me, who was on the jury present. And he said, so why in the Saint-Saëns, in the Introduction and Rondo, did you not play an uppo staccato? I said, when I approached the spot, it didn't feel like it was going to fly. So I thought better at least not to have a train wreck. And I just played it spiccato. He said, but you had a staccato in Lesteg. I'm like, yeah, when I approached the passage, my arm said, okay, I'm gonna. And when I approached the passage in the Saint-Saëns, my arm said, "No, sorry."
No,
I To answer the listener's question, though, that wasn't the reason I didn't make the final round. It was a matter of curiosity for the president of the jury, like, why did you opt for an easy out? And my answer was, I opted for the easy out because otherwise it would have sounded bad. So that kind of perfectionism was going to defeat my musical intent.
right.
What stopped me from getting to the final round were, too many imperfections, throughout, compared to other people who were a lot less vulnerable. But when it's either you're trying desperately hard to do this thing that is written and you are failing at doing, perfectionism, I think, is saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to get this same effect from this other technique, and I'm going to go for the effect, not for the letter of the law.
You're right.
Sophie?
It's Sophie. It's 9 o'clock here, so it's way past her bedtime, but she's definitely making herself present. You're absolutely right. And if anything, I would add to this is when we say that wasn't perfect, and I think maybe perhaps, and Rory, if you're still listening, you can chime in. If you listen to yourself playing, if you record yourself, you listen back to it and you say, "Oh, that wasn't good enough. It needs to be better." I would stop you right there, because that's not a statement that means anything. What does it mean that it needs to be better? What needs to be better? Why? How? What exactly are you not happy with? Are you really not happy that you didn't shift correctly there? Or perhaps that's what caught your attention and you're just not happy with the way that the phrase was shaped. Because so often, again, we focus on these minutiae, which, as you said, we don't hear from 6 feet away, that people in the audience don't pick up on, but instead they're listening and thinking, "Oh, that was a boring performance. It sounded like a technical exercise." So I think in order to solve the question, to solve the problem, we actually need to figure out exactly what the problem is and what it is about the problem that we're not happy with. So, I always ask my students, what did you think? And they say, "Well, I think I missed this, or I didn't do that." And okay, we can all point out the blemishes on the most perfect thing, but you have to look deeper than that, and you have to say, what exactly were you not happy with? And then you say why. And I think, kind of bringing this in, one of the most important lessons that Mr. Danchenko taught me was how to teach myself.
Yes.
Because our teachers are not meant to be our fixers. They're not meant to sit there and say, "No, do this fingering or do that bowing." Yes, that's part of the process. But if you teach somebody how to teach themselves, that's the lesson that's going to, they're going to use for the rest of their lives. So, I learned how to listen to myself critically and to analyze what the issue is, analyze what makes me unhappy about the way I sound, and then work through the problem. What can be done? Well, is it the bowing? Is it the elbow? Is it the fingering? Is it, my mood? Is it the barometric pressure or whatever?
Haven't you found that most of the time, as soon as you've described the problem, you have also basically put your finger on the solution?
Absolutely. Well, that's the whole point.
Right.
You work through the problem until you've come to the solution. I'm thirsty. I'm in the mountains. Okay, well, where does water live? Well, how do you find water? You go down to the bottom, you work your way through, or there's plants here, so let's follow the plants. I mean, it's common sense even in the violin. And oftentimes students who are just sort of beginning their journey with the instrument, you'll be amazed at how they're able to follow the trail and come to the solution on their own if you guide them.
If only they stay with asking themselves the question.
Exact. That's the only way. Just saying, "Oh, that wasn't good enough." That's a statement that you can write a book of questions about. Right. For what? For whom? Why? In what way?
Perfectionism, to go back to Rose's question, I think perfectionism is not actually perfectionism. It's a sort of kabuki of perfectionism when all you know how to do is to beat yourself up over, I missed that shift, or I play that bowing backwards.
And in reality, what we do isn't rocket science. It's if you think of building a house, you look at the most complex building and you think, wow, how did they possibly build this? And the answer is one brick at a time.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Okay, you're not happy with the technique? Okay, take the musicality out. Let's spend a week, metronome in front of you. Da da ba da da ba da 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 ba da 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 dum. A week of your life at most. I mean, honestly, it's going to be 2 days.
And it's not going to be even 2 days, probably.
It's
in
most cases, it's going to be a half an hour.
It's a doctor prodding and saying, does that hurt? No. Does that hurt? No. Does that hurt? Ah, okay, we found the problem.
All right, so you put a Band-Aid here. Next problem. Yeah. That's going to heal if you keep looking after it. You move on to the next issue. And before you know it, a month later, you're playing the piece flawlessly. Cleanly. Or you've presented a canvas on which you can paint with colors, and you can add emotions and musicality to it and not be inhibited by inability to play something or cross the string in a rhythmic way or land a shift or so.
But I do think it's essential to point out for the people who are, the residents of practice rooms and don't ever leave practice rooms, people, I've met like that. It's essential to point out that search for perfectionism can itself become the imperfection because you are so constrained. You are so, playing inside this imaginary sort of straitjacket. That's what's wrong with the playing. The playing is straitjacketed because you're trying so hard not to screw up. Yeah. How often have you said to a student, you are playing this, you're rushing this because you're cutting something off, and therefore the next thing is happening too soon, and that's what's causing the rushing. What's causing the rushing is the fear of causing the rushing.
Exactly. It's a complete chain reaction. Everything is connected. Everything is linked to each other. And so if you focus so much on just one element of it all being correct, it will never be correct. Right. People who spend more than 4 or 5 hours in a practice room, without offending anybody, please get out of the room.
God bless you.
Get a life, because, and I mean this in the most sincere and respectful way. Get a life, meaning go to museums, go outside, go watch trees, go watch cars flying by, go watch people, go read books, go do stuff.
Maybe even look at the music. Play the piece of music.
Just look at the sheet of music in your mind, because everything around you is what makes you an artist. It's what makes you a musician. Your life experiences are transferred through the music that you play. And so if you spent your life in the practice room, I would bet a lot of money to say that that's what you're going to sound like, because you have no outside experiences to base or to inject into your music. I mean, I know we've all been there. The month before a concert or the week before the concert, all of a sudden we realize, okay, life goes on hold. I'm going in this practice room and I'm not coming out until it's perfect, which is different because we have a very specific goal that we're aggressively tackling.
A short-term goal.
Short-term goal, like a weightlifter that says, I've got a month to get in shape. Life goes out the window. We're on a strict diet. We're in a regimen of exercises. We're pumping iron. We're lifting weights, and we're bulking up in the muscle. When that competition is done, we can go back to our sort of regular regime. But to do that constantly, we're athletes. These are muscles which get tired. If you're overworking them, they are at some point going to say, I'm done. And you will have problems if you're spending so much time. B, they need time to rest. They need time to develop. And
well, from the neurological perspective, the brain needs time to put what you've just been teaching it into long-term storage.
How many times have you put fingerings in a part and come back to that part? Let's say it's something you're learning. First time you're playing through, right? Mm-hmm. And you sit there, okay, you're learning the piece, and you think, okay, well, obviously it has to go like this. This is a fingering. Good night. Come back in the morning.
What was I thinking?
This doesn't work at all. In fact, it's completely natural to do it on a totally different fingering. That's our brain resting, sleeping on it, as we say, sleep on it. Coming back, the muscle memory has changed. It's developed. It's now adapted to something different. It works differently. Same example. You play something, you put it away for 10 years, you come back to it and you think, God, this piece looks familiar. I think I've played this. And without even knowing it, your fingers are just playing it because it's built into our muscle memory. And that's
you discover that you've played it by playing it, suddenly discovering that it's there.
Yeah. And this muscle memory that's built into the neurons of our fingers, of our bows, of our arms, that's all there. That's not going, that we don't need 8 hours to beat that in, because by doing that, you're actually not letting this muscle memory sink into the place where it needs to sit. It's like fishing. I'm full of examples today. It's like fishing. You cast a line. You've got to give it time for the hook to come down into the water. You've got to give it time for the fish to smell the worm. You've got to give it time for the fish to look at it and say, is that a hook? I'll give it a try. If you're fly fishing, that's 8 hours a day. You're fly fishing, you're just casting on top of the water, and that's it. You're not letting that bug get into the water. That's the 8 hours that's a different approach. But if you're just fishing, you need to give it time. If you're practice a little bit, spend time thinking about it, spend time cooking. And while you're cooking, you're going to say, oh, hey, hold on. I just thought of something. That's when we think of the best approaches to music.
And sometimes teaching years later, and sometimes, just coming back to a piece where you suddenly realize that you've overlooked this idea or that. I am
absolutely
a firm believer in enough practice to create a result, to be effective, but that if you are going past 4 hours, odds are you're being inefficient and possibly destructive, and certainly, physically destructive.
Well, yeah, and I don't believe that anything that we do should take 8 hours to regularly to learn. That means something is missing. Something, again, we're not brain surgeons. We're not. I mean, it's so simple. You got 4 fingers. You put them in the string, and you move this thing across the string. It's not rocket science. You just have to do it at the right time, with the right fingering, at the right speed, at the right pressure, and at the right part of the bow.
But you have to, I have to, but the people who've been doing this for a while have to remind ourselves that to get to the point where it's just 4 fingers, it's just 4 strings. Listen, it's not rocket science. To get to that point, there were hours, and there were years full of hours.
I never
you could not cram that
6 hours. I don't think
I did. I did in one summer when I was 11 years old, practice 6 hours a day, and at the end of that summer, I was a far worse player. Because I was 11 years old, so obviously my practicing wasn't efficient. So obviously I was pacing back and forth watching the clock, right? Okay. I was trying to prove a point to my mother.
Yeah, I remember, this is funny, talking about growing up with musical parents who insisted and demanded and set us on the right path. I remember one very specific day. I have no idea why this one day has stuck in my mind, but I wanted to go and do something, and my mom said, no, you have to go practice. And she said, I think both my parents probably said, you have to practice for 4 hours and then you can go and do this. Go in the yard and play. I was in middle school or high school or something. And what did I do? I went in my room, closed the door, I put the clock in front of me, and I made sounds for 4 hours.
You made sounds.
I made sounds. I made noise from 1 till 5 o'clock. And when that hand struck 5 o'clock, I was halfway out the door.
Yep.
Was that a productive session? Absolutely not. Was it destructive? Probably.
Yes.
Because my mind was so gone. And in practicing for a time, I wasn't practicing for a purpose. You were
practicing to fill the time.
I was practicing to fill the time, or I was doing something over and over and over, expecting it to get better without really thinking of what needs to happen in order for it to become better.
I've said to students, especially in the last year, as some students get closer to graduation, if you just try again, it's not going to suddenly be different by itself.
Yeah.
The only thing that makes it different is you. And if nothing is happening here that is saying, okay, this time let me try it backwards. This time let me try it, with different bowings, whatever. If nothing is changing here, the same thing is going to happen here. So
Absolutely.
Having repeated the same thing, having practiced for an hour, I explain to parents, your child has not necessarily practiced.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, that's why in lessons, we find ourselves so often kind of saying, stop, stop repeating yourself. If a student is playing, they make a mistake, and all of a sudden they just keep playing that passage over and over and over. I'm like, stop. You're cementing
the mistake.
Approach. You're cementing the mistake in your muscle memory, in your ears, in your mind, and in your subconscious, because now every time you play this passage, you're going to be thinking, hyper-focusing on this one mistake that you made once.
And in fact, it will sound wrong to you if it's right. I'll give you another example. The Peter Schickele New Horizons in Music Appreciation?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the viewers, the idea is that Peter Schickele, who is the person behind P.D. Kubach, is doing this thing in the character of a sportscaster, announcing blow by blow the events of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And right as the French horn announces the second theme, bum, 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 difficult to sing with these things in. As the French horn announces it, in order to have a thing for the sportscasters to discuss, the French horn intentionally fumbles. And Schickele's character, oh my gosh, can you believe he's fumbled? Yeah, that's Bobby Corno. That's the third fumble he's made this season. And they go on about this. Now, I heard that comedic bit, when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. I swear to you that for the next 3 to 4 years, every time I heard a Beethoven symphony without a horn fumble, it sounded wrong. I knew up here, that it was the right way was the right way. But I kept on expecting that grace note and that leap of an augmented second. So yeah, do not brainlessly, like an ox plowing his furrow, do not just wander up and down the same straight line.
Yeah, so. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. It's quality, not quantity. It's always knowing why you are repeating something. It's knowing what you're expecting to change. It's knowing what you're looking for when you're listening to it. Otherwise, you're wasting time. Simple.
There was another question that's sort of about this, so what do you do outside the practice room? What are the most crucial skills that a musician should develop that are not traditionally discussed in a conservatory?
Is this a PG show? Ability to interact with others.
Yeah.
I think we're all human beings, so we're all different. We all have different social skills, and that's part of the beauty. That's the world we are living in. But I think it's important to learn to interact with others, not bury yourself in the score, or again, don't live in a practice room.
Chamber music is important not only to learn chamber music, which is vital in and of itself. Chamber music is important because you're interacting musically with other people, after which rehearsal, concert, etc. Presumably you don't so hate one another that you run off in 4 separate directions.
Yeah.
You might go out for a coffee and actually have a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even more so, you learn how to interact with one another in rehearsal, and you learn how to ask the second violinist or the first violinist or the violist, or to present your idea to your 3 colleagues in a quartet and say, hey, how can we unify our sound? Because that's the beauty of chamber music is it's a whole different topic. But you have to be able to present your idea, explain your idea if somebody challenges it, and hopefully somebody does challenge you, because it should never be, hey, can we do this differently? Okay, well, I'm sorry, but why is that
First of
okay?
all,
Why do you not
and
care, how we do it? Why don't you say, well, I wanted to do it like this. Well, I was doing it like this because hopefully I've thought a bit, and I wasn't just playing and seeing what comes out. Yes, you should be agreeable to try something, but don't always just flip flop and say, yeah, I'll do it. I don't care. Yeah, you want to do it piano? We can do piano. That means it doesn't mean anything to you. That means that you're just, well, what's the point of playing if you don't care?
yeah,
If somebody feels
be
very
vested.
strongly, yeah, if somebody feels very strongly about something, you can, you can maybe adapt or agree to accommodate them. But but you have to learn to express your idea. You have to learn to back it up, and you have to learn to accept the fact that it's not always going to be accepted.
Would you say that even less music-centric things, things like languages, things like knowing the ins and outs of the industry in terms of this competition is famous for being an in-house kind of thing.
Yeah,
This orchestra is so traditional that anything new is a bad idea. Like
I think
insights.
one of the things. I mean, you mentioned languages. Yeah, it's incredible. And again, having the fortune to have lived and traveled in so many countries, it's the basic barrier. That's the barrier between countries. It's not the visas or the barriers that are in place, not the chain
Yeah.
link fences. It's the languages, because if we can communicate with one another, we can do so much. And that's why the cliche that music is a universal language exists, because it's true, because it is the universal language. Because
it
without
supersedes it
it
supersedes
supersedes
the
anything. Yeah,
the actual words, which can be
you can have
misunderstood.
four people who don't speak the same language playing the most glorious, the most beautiful music together. Um, because oftentimes we don't need to communicate. We can just either show, or we can lead in the way that it makes other people instantly understand what it is that you're trying to do. Yeah, languages are great, and languages are great for you regardless whether you're a musician or not. You travel to France, you travel to Italy, and you travel to one of the few countries left in the world where English isn't the main language. Because I mean, you travel to Russia, God help you if you don't speak Russian. I mean, it was only in the last few years that I noticed signs in English in Moscow, and
Yeah,
that's 2000s. But nowadays you go virtually to any major country, any major city, and sometimes you forget where you are, because you can talk to anybody in English. All the signs are in English, and everything looks the same. You got the same Starbucks and the same McDonald's signs and everything, and you're like, am I in Germany? Am I in France? Am I in Italy? Or am I
but
in Greece?
there's even after that, I think when these become universal translators, when they are in real time piping your speaking Russian to somebody speaking German at you, you hear in your ear them speaking Russian, they hear their ear you speaking German. Even after that, you've still got cultural differences. You've still got the sort of things that will not raise an eyebrow in Russia, that will cause offense in Germany. The sort of things that are just nice and friendly in Israel, that in the UK might come across as somehow impolitic.
Yeah,
Um, the
I would. Yeah, I'll let you finish before I
well,
would
no,
say
no,
I
that
would go
that
further.
was the gist of it. That I'm not just talking languages in terms of nouns and verbs, but also I wish in conservatories people spent a little time saying, so okay, when you go to Japan, and you will go to Japan, some of the things to bear in mind are, for example, that when you walk into a house, you take your shoes off. You know, Sooner or later, somebody has to tell you that. You might as
Yeah.
well tell you that in the conservatory, at the
You
risk of
learn
you
it pretty
already knowing
quickly
it.
when you get there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I would even go further. You learn a little bit about the language, or a little bit about the culture, because the music that you play that comes from those countries, in many respects, it represents the language. I mean, you look at Italy, the Italian language is so beautiful that you can't think of Italian music. You can't think of operas and not hear the Italian you can't not hear Italian in
not hear the words that underpin
not
it.
hear the words. It would be written differently. If you listen to, maybe if you listen to German music and you think of German, and German is very different from Italian, and it's a completely different sound, it's a completely different structure, and German music sounds very different from Italian music. French music sounds very different from Greek music. Language is part of culture. It's part of how the sound makes one feel. And all of that, I think, goes into the music that we're playing. We have to know a little bit about it. We have to at least heard it. I mean, take Brazil, one of my absolute favorite types of music. Portuguese is such a gorgeous language. I wish I could speak it, but whenever I hear bossa nova or something, it's just beautiful. It's just,
but also it is unlike other things. If you want to get the flavor of it, the flavor of it isn't going to be a teacher telling you stress this note and sustain that note.
No, you have to hear the language. You have to hear the intonation of the person, of the culture, the heat of the dance floor, or the sun scorching on the beach, and
so that you can play music that is very relaxing, right?
That's right. So you can just relax and drive down the street in traffic thinking, ah! But it's okay. You've got the Vivaldi Four Seasons playing in the background.
Yes, so exactly.
Everything is peachy. It's just Tchaikovsky, Pathétique.
Well, yes. This is what I listen to when I come home and I pour myself a glass of white wine, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to put my feet up, and a little bit of Tchaikovsky doesn't hurt.
No, that's fine. It's happy.
On that fabulous note, we should probably wrap up. Yeah, on the note of the Tchaikovsky Pathétique.
That's it.
We're talking about the fifth, at least. Unless there are other questions.
They're all happy.
Do we see any further questions?
No, I think Sophie has questions.
I hear Sophie's question. So I haven't heard any meltdowns from upstairs from my kids.
What is the schedule of these
podcasts? That's a very good point that I should point out. These podcasts will regularly take place on Tuesdays. The next one is with Mrs. Olenia Fuski, who was the director of the Juilliard Pre-College when I went there. And the one after that is with Mr. Jong-Hwa Park, a pianist from Seoul. And they will be, further guests will be announced as the podcasts go on. But Tuesdays will be the regular day, and the time will depend on what time zone the guest is from.
The beauty of modern technology.
Right? You are right here with me.
When can we do this? We're living in completely different parts of the world, and now we've been forced to kind of adapt to.
It's an everyday.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Do you remember seeing 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I've only seen bits of it. I'm embarrassed to say.
Well, there's an entire sequence where the protagonist calls home on a video phone from a payphone. He calls on a video payphone from a station on the moon back to his.
I know we've got to wrap up. I was just invited to a Facebook group where classmates of the Ignatian School have set up, and it's like a private group for all the graduates of the school, and it's fantastic. People are posting pictures from the 30s, from the 40s, from 50s, 60s, 70s of their classes, their experiences. It's an incredible time capsule, and we used to have this payphone right by the stairs. That that's the only place where you could make a phone call with 2 kopecks. You can drop it in, and the rotary dial, Mom, I'll be home in an hour. Okay, click, bye. And it was such a mind just blowing memory just to see that. And of course, now in the UK, you still find the well-known traditional, London phone booths. Yeah, the Doctor Who phone booths. Except most of them are now little internet hubs you can plug in to get Wi-Fi. But yeah, no, I
am astonished by the fact that we can have access to people like you, to the highest end professionals like you, as though you are in the same city. We have sort of gone beyond geographic limitations. We've gone beyond, time limitations.
Yeah.
It is up to us to make the most of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's the same for lessons. I mean, the beauty of it.
Yes.
I've seen so many festivals and masterclasses pop up where, you think a year ago and you would think, I want to take a lesson with this person and that person and that person. You have to be a millionaire to fly around the world, pay for these lessons, be a part of these
Stay in a hotel.
Stay in a hotel. And all of a sudden, yes, it's not the same. Of course, it's not the same as having a one-on-one lesson with somebody with this interaction. But I will say the technology is catching up very quickly. These things are becoming very affordable. And you can get yourself a very affordable microphone that records your playing in a way that the teacher can actually hear the differences in the dynamic.
Yeah.
Don't need to, the sound doesn't get all compressed into one thing. And to a certain degree, you can do quite a lot over the internet now. I know people have been teaching over Skype for years, but I think I was
forced into it by COVID, and I have to say it has exceeded my expectations.
Yeah. It's teaching us to listen differently, and I think as teachers, it has changed in many ways how I teach versus if I'm teaching somebody in person.
Well, there are luxuries of time you would not otherwise have, but
you listen differently too. Because I think I would say over the internet, I'm listening a lot more critically to somebody's playing, and I'm focusing on certain things that I perhaps wouldn't focus on if I was listening to them in person.
Yeah, and even for demonstrating, if I want to demonstrate something about my left hand to somebody, holding my hand in front of the screen gives somebody a close-up view. What are they going to do in a private lesson? Like stand here, stare.
Yeah. Here, look at my hand. Yeah. Anyway, hey, it's been really wonderful. Thanks for having me on here.
Thank you so much for making the time.
And kudos to you for doing this. This is a fantastic service for students and parents and musicians alike. And I know that more people are going to join in and pose questions and make things challenging for us. And that's the beauty.
That's why I very much would like to have you, come back so that I can get to the questions I didn't get to this time. Because obviously there's loads to talk about.
We have a lot to talk about. No, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Igor. Спасибо.
Спасибо. See you.
Ciao.